Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video on the null factor law. So the null factor law says if a, b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0. In other words, if two things multiply together to give 0, either the first thing is equal to 0 or the second thing is equal to 0. We need to use this law when it comes to solving quadratic equations. We're going to get questions like this. X minus 3 times, say, x plus 2 is equal to 0. This is how we're going to go about solving quadratic equations. So what we have here is we have something in the first bracket times something is equal to 0. We're going to use the null factor law to find the values of x in this equation. The null factor law says either the first thing is equal to 0, so that would mean x minus 3 is equal to 0, or the second thing is equal to 0, which would mean x plus 2 is equal to 0. So if x minus 3 equals 0, you know how to solve this. This is just a linear equation. All we need to do is add 3 to both sides. We get x equals 3. Similarly, over here, we need to subtract 2 from both sides, and we get the solution x equals minus 2. We're going to see a lot more of these. This is a quadratic equation. Now, quadratic equations are different from the linear equations we've been doing because they can have two solutions. I know you're used to solving linear equations where there's only one solution, but quadratic equations sometimes have two solutions, sometimes one solution. An example of one that has one solution would be something like this. X minus 2 squared is equal to 0. So, of course, when you square something, you are just timesing it by itself. So this is just x minus 2 times by itself equals 0. So we have the null factor law says either the first thing is equal to 0 or the second thing is equal to 0. But both brackets are the same. So whether the first or second thing equals 0, either way, you get x minus 2 equals 0, add 2 to both sides. So this is an example of a quadratic equation that only has one solution. So what about if we had something like this? 3x times x plus 8 is equal to 0. Well, people seem to get tripped up by these kind of equations. But we're just going to use the null factor law again. We have something times something is equal to 0. So the null factor law says either the first thing is equal to 0. Now, if 3x is equal to 0, x is just equal to 0. Because we're saying 3 times what equals 0? Well, 3 times 0 equals 0. So either the first thing is equal to 0 or the second thing is equal to 0. So if x plus 8 is equal to 0, then we can just subtract 8 from both sides. We get x is minus 8. So what we're saying here, either of these values of x will make this a true statement. That's why they are solutions. Once again, equations like this can have more than one solution. So what about if we had this equation here? Well, this is a little more difficult, even though we're using the null factor law as before. So null factor law says something times something equals 0. Either the first thing is equal to 0. So if 2x minus 5 equals 0, we just add 5 to both sides and divide each side by 2. So the answer here is a fraction, 5 over 2 or 2.5. So null factor law says either the first thing is equal to 0 or the second thing is equal to 0. So if 3x plus 1 is equal to 0, here we just subtract 1 from both sides and then divide each side by 3. So the two solutions here are minus a third and 5 over 2, both fractions. So now let's look going the other way when we know the solutions and we have to find the equation. So let's look at these two questions here. In each case, we're finding a quadratic equation, so it's going to have two brackets like the ones on the previous slides. In the first one, we're looking for one that has solutions x equals 2 and x equals minus 3. We're just going to do the opposite of what we were doing before. So we're going to have two brackets. When you multiply them, you get 0, just like on the previous slide. So x equals 2 means if I substitute x equals 2, I want the first bracket to equal 0. So this is not going to be x plus 2, it's x minus 2. If I substitute x for 2, it makes this first bracket equal 0. Similarly, for the second bracket, I want to be able to substitute x for minus 3 to get 0. So it's going to be x plus 3. So notice we've switched the signs. Positive became a negative, negative became a positive. The reason it's x plus 3, if I change x to minus 3, it will make the second bracket equal to 0. So this is my equation and I'm done. So let's look at this one here. Quadratic equation with integer coefficients that has only one solution this time, x equals minus 3/4. So because it only has one solution, it will be a square. So it will look like this. Again, I'm making it a positive when the solution was negative. If I substitute x for minus 3/4, it makes this bracket equal 0. So this has only one solution. Now this said I wanted the quadratic equation with integer coefficients. Well, this isn't an integer because an integer means a whole number. What I can do is I can times everything by 4. The reason I'm timesing by 4 is it's the bottom of the fraction here. It will get rid of the fraction. So if I times x by 4 and 3/4 by 4, I get this. And then if I times 0 by 4, it's still 0. So this equation here now has integer coefficients 4 and 3, and it has only one solution, which is x is minus 3/4. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. It's been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.